Welcome to the Jboy Show, hosted by Jake Crain, the fastest growing sports show in the nation.
I'm Coach Hugh Freeze.
This is Super Bowl champion Brandon Graham.
Hey, this is DJ Shockley, and you're watching.
And thanks for watching the Jboy Show.
What's up? What's up? What's up? Thanks for hopping in again. We got the hits coming. Going to get to our interview with Bryan Fischer from Athlon Sports, talking some NIL. It's a huge part of the conversation. Now that the pandemic's kind of dying down, it's really starting to come to the forefront with the NCAA hearings going on and stuff like that. We don't get political, but want to kind of talk about the essence of it and paying athletes, for services. And I'm going to get to that in that interview with him in a second. But first, I'm going to shout out betonline.ag as usual. Head over there today. The online casino is always open, whether you want props, teasers, pleasers, whatever, NBA, Major League Baseball, anything that's going on. Like I say, if they're playing Quidditch or pickleball or whatever, and there's a spread on it, it's going to be on BetOnline. So head over there today. The sign-up bonuses are unbelievable. It's betonline.ag and tell them that Jboy sent you. My monologue today is about NIL. And this is something I really haven't talked a ton about, haven't focused on a ton about because I wanted to wait for the right time and the right guest. But here's my feelings on that. I believe that if you are able to garner endorsements for your extraordinary ability, elite ability, your ability to do something that very, very few people can do and that a ton of people love to watch and participate in, you should be able to make money off that. I think it's unbelievably hypocritical for me sitting here to say, hey, I'd like to make money off my name, image, and likeness, the Jboy Show, merchandise, this, that, and the other, and sit here and say, no, but you can't, throwing your body in harm's way multiple times and being able to run a 4.4 and make amazing catches and do things off the field and on the field and still be able to perform in unbelievable environments underneath unbelievable amounts of pressure. How does a music major that's on scholarship have the ability to make money off making a mixtape, yet a running back that is performing in front of hundreds of thousands of people on Saturdays that can do things, as I mentioned earlier, that nobody else really on campus can do? For example, there is nobody on Georgia's campus, including Carson Beck and Georgia's backup quarterbacks, that can do what JT Daniels can do. They can't. So if JT Daniels is good enough to get a sponsorship from Gatorade and get paid, let him get paid. I think there's a common misconception thinking that when NIL passes, everybody on the team, from the first string quarterback to the fourth string corner, is going to get paid. That's not how it's going to work. You're not going to have a ton of guys getting endorsements, this, that, and the other. That's not the way the market demands it. You look at teams like Alabama and Clemson and some of these teams that have the best players, the best roster, the most NFL players on their team, they're going to have more, but you're not going to see 20 guys on that roster getting millions of dollars. And the argument saying, oh, well, we should tell this person they can't make this money or we should make them put the money away in a certain place. What? That's not how it works here. We don't tell people what to do with their money, what you have to do with your money outside of paying taxes. So when I look at this, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy on both sides. And I know there's levels to it and there's guardrails that has to be put in. Why not add financial classes to what they have to take if they get these endorsements and have the ability, even if they don't, for branding and marketing and stuff like that, so they're prepared? They do it for rookies in the NFL. One of the first things they do is sit them down and have a financial class because they're getting a lot of money, not used to having a lot of money. And why can we do that for college? People say, oh, well, you're going to give an 18-year-old kid $100,000. Let me give you a hint. A lot of these 18-year-old kids, especially the high-level ones, are getting $100,000 and sometimes before they even step foot on campus. So people that want to argue that and pretend like that doesn't exist and yet put this in a totally different category, I think it's a double standard. Now, a lot of these kids, what they're going to do is take that money and do what a lot of them do with the scholarship money they get and send it back home. But who am I to tell an 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old kid that's out there risking injury that is doing something that not a very small percentage of the population can do at that level? Tell him he can't make money or tell him what to do with their money. They have to find a way to structure it. I understand. I get that part. But denying them the ability to make money, I mean, go back to Tim Tebow. How many, Cam Newton, how many number 2 jerseys at Auburn were sold? Not because it said Newton on the back, because it can't say Newton on the back. But how many number 2 jerseys were sold during his year at Auburn? How much money was made off of that? Would those same amount of jerseys been sold if Number 2 was just some random player. How much money did that make for the university? How many more people did that bring in, and how many more eyes and exposure did that bring in for Auburn in the community? Tim Tebow at Florida, same thing. You can go down the list. So there needs to be an avenue for these guys to make money off of their name. And I'll say it again. How does a music major on scholarship make money off a mixtape? Yet Kyle Trask or some of these other guys go down the list, Bryce Young, Najee Harris, can't make money off their name when you have $100,000 people showing up to watch these games. People say, oh, well, a scholarship that's plenty worth it. Well, there's kids on academic scholarships. It's all over the place. And academics is huge. It's huge. It's a pillar of what we do. It's a rite of passage almost. Now, you can think either way about that, the way it's set up. And listen, there's a lot of good arguments on that. But the next time that 100,000 people show up and pay thousands of dollars a piece per tickets to watch a kid take a chemistry test, then you can argue that to me. But let's live in the real world. And the real world says, if you offer a product, you're a lead at it, it garners tons of money, tons of exposure, and benefits everybody, including the community, that person should get a slice of that. That's my monologue for today. We're going to talk more about that with Bryan Fischer. Going to talk about where it is, looking at the dates, when things will pass. Will it be a blanket rule? There's so much we got to get into. This is really important, and it's going to change the game. It is, and there needs to be guardrails on it, and we're going to dive into it. Let's win the water cooler. All right, everybody, as promised, got Bryan Fischer from Athlon Sports, also hosted the Going for Two podcast. Check that out. Excited to get Bryan here to talk about name, image, and likeness, something that's moving through Congress. There's hearings and everything going on right now, and it's going to really affect the game. Bryan, I really appreciate you joining us, man, and what a crazy time in college athletics.
Yeah, I keep telling people, this is maybe the most exciting time to cover college sports because so much is changing. I mean, really, you look at it kind of going back through the pandemic plus 2021 and what's going on now. It might be the most dynamic changes in college athletics that the sport has really ever seen. So fun to be on with you to talk about it.
Definitely. And we appreciate you being here. And in my monologue, I talked about it. I'm for it. I'm for athletes being able to get paid for their services, to offer something that a very few percentage of the population can do, yet a very large percentage of the population will watch and attend and loves to be a part of, and talking about college athletics, and not just football, basketball, baseball, and down the line. And what blows my mind, Bryan, and I think there's a double standard. How, and I want to get your opinion on this, how can a music major on scholarship make money for a mixtape, yet a quarterback like JT Daniels, or at least before this, can't make money off his ability, which is kind of in the same vein if you really think about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the argument really for the last 5-10 years. Why can't these students who are be just like any other students? And that is kind of the crux of the matter. And frankly, the NCAA has slow played this. I mean, this has been an issue that's cropped up time after time for much of the past, really 2 decades. Going back to, you think back, there was a UCF kicker who had a YouTube channel and basically had to give up football in order to pursue monetization on that channel. And I think finally everybody's opening their eyes to the fact that, well, let's treat these guys like other students, where they are able to kind of go out there and join the marketplace, promote themselves, like everybody else is doing. And I think you're slowly starting to see the realization that it is coming. The spate of NIL laws has certainly hastened that and made sure that everybody's kind of come up to that July 1 deadline and said, all right, here's the date where everybody is going to flip the switch. But it's been a slow progress. And I think finally everybody realizes not only are athletes going to be able to take advantage of frankly, what is theirs, their name, image, and likeness, but really understand that this is a key moment, I think, for college sports, to where the power has shifted back to the players themselves.
No, I agree. And it's really interesting to watch. And I want to kind of dispel some common narratives, I think, that people get confused on. It's not like every kid on the team is going to be endorsed by Gatorade. It's, to me, you look at the top level teams, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, you're going to have, maybe 5 to 10 guys somewhere around there, maybe a little bit more. But to think that every player, like the 3rd string corner, is going to sign a deal with Adidas, that's just not how it's going to work. It's going to bear what the market bears, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's going to start out with small amounts, even for JT Daniels or some of these bigger names, the quarterbacks, those star wide receivers. The deals that were being talked about, it's not going to be, it's going to be like low five figures at the high end, really. There might be a Zion Williamson coming in that earns a multi-million-dollar sneaker contract or something like that, but those things are going to be so rare. Where it really does help is frankly not the third string kicker or somebody like that. It really helps women athletes that have great social media followings. They're going to be able to generate several $1,000s. Whether social media posts, whether it's promotions on commercials or whatnot. It really is kind of a broad-based expansion to allow these athletes to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness. And the deals that you're going to hear about, it's going to be the star freshmen coming in, and it's going to be the quarterbacks, and that's going to be the focus. But I think that the bulk of action is really going to be on these small amount deals for an Instagram post, for a tweet promoting a product. That sort of thing is really kind of going to be the lifeblood of this. And it's not going to be huge money except for a very small amount of athletes, but it's going to be something that is tangible for a lot of these guys who, allows them to not only pay for rent, but go out and buy an extra pair of shoes.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I mean, it'll change a lot of people's lives. And like, Brian, a lot of these kids send that money back home. A lot of them do. I've seen it with my own eyes. I promise you, I've seen it with my own eyes. And we always find a way. And listen, not every sport is a revenue sport. We know that. And everybody, you talk about NIL, the first thing you think about is college football, then you think about college basketball. But somebody like me that was involved, in college baseball and some of these smaller sports, these Title IX sports, this could be huge for them. I mean, the ability not only to have yourself promoting posts and stuff like that, but just for example, if you're a top equestrian rider, what's to stop you from getting a deal with the saddle company or something that will actually help out a sport that doesn't make money? Because at the end of the day, the realistic thing is you have to look at the bottom line. There are sports that make money and there are sports that don't make money. Is this a way you think that could help supplement maybe some of these sports? And we've seen sports getting cut left and right because of the pandemic. Is this something that can kind of add a little juice to some of those sports that don't make the money that college football or college basketball does?
Absolutely. I think it's going to be huge for them. I think that is really the marketplace where this can really serve a huge need and fill that hole. Not only because you look at some of these athletes, especially you mentioned non-revenue sports, sometimes they don't even have full scholarships. They have partial scholarships. So this is a way to even pay for school, that they aren't getting right now. And so I think that's one aspect. You look at women's gymnastics. I think that's a huge marketplace, especially every Olympic cycle as we have coming up right now, an opportunity for some of those athletes to make money. You go back, look at how viral videos, from the UCLA gymnastics team or, Utah, Auburn, Oklahoma, where, these gymnastics programs have an opportunity for those athletes to go out and make some money. And I think it's huge for them. I think it's huge for, other sports, baseball, you mentioned there. Maybe a guy instead of going, to the minor leagues and riding buses around the South in the middle of the summer, maybe this is an opportunity for you to say, hey, I can make 5 to 10 extra grand, here promoting a product for an LSU, an Auburn, a Tennessee, whatever baseball program it might be. Maybe that's cause enough to kind of come back for school for another extra couple of years. Whereas maybe you said, I want to get the money, I'm going to go pro right away. I think it could help a lot with some of these programs as well, retaining talent, keeping them in college because, as you well know, I mean, the lifestyle of some of these colleges, especially in the SEC, the ACC, these Power 5 programs, it is way more beneficial for the athletes to be on a college campus, riding, the charter flights around to play games. If you can add some money on top of that, that's a way better life experience on top of adding a degree, to the mix. I think it's going to be attractive to a lot of these programs, a lot of these schools in terms of retaining talent as well.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's just fascinating to me. And you talk about turning the page. This is going to be a big pillar, obviously, when we look back, 20, 30 years from now in college athletics. In my monologue, I hit this, Brian, but I want your opinion on this because one of the arguments is, oh, well, a scholarship is enough. To me, when I look at it, and like I explained, I think we're arguing two different things. There's not going to be 100,000 people show up to watch somebody take a chemistry test. Not that chemistry isn't important, but what are your thoughts on that argument? How would you push back against that if you choose to do so?
Well, I think it's never been enough, and we've slowly kind of chipped away at it. We've added cost of attendance, we've added a whole slate of things. I think it's a nice out. Yeah, it's great to have $100,000 degree paid for by the school, but at the same time, I think it's been an artificial cap on the ceiling that these athletes can earn, especially at the high end. We've seen it. Just the value that some of those star athletes bring to their universities far exceeds what that university is essentially paying themselves. It's the athletic department money being transferred back into the school. And so at the end of the day, it's a great deal for a lot of athletes, but it's not that great a deal for some. And that select few, I think, has been addressed. And I think it's ultimately led to, really an improvement across the board for all athletes in terms of facilities, in terms of, just your day-to-day life as a student. It's helped tremendously. And so I think everybody's kind of coming to realize that it's not just all about that scholarship. There do need to be other avenues for these people to succeed in life.
No, I agree. And another argument to me is, you look when some of these bigger SEC, ACs go around the Power 5, Group of 5, whatever. A lot of times if they have a good year in football or they got a ton of exposure, look at the enrollment. Look how much money has Alabama made in enrollment off Nick Saban and some of the athletes that have gone to Alabama. I mean, it's exploded. And I think that's something else that needs to be looked into because it's a $1 billion industry, Brian. I mean, it really is. And it's only getting bigger. You look at these facilities. I bring this up all the time. Georgia's got chairs in their locker room made out of unicorn leather, man. It's like $12,000 a piece. It's unbelievable to see that stuff. And I think that's another good argument there. Speaking about a good argument, if you're trying to find a way to get your daughter, son, prospect, doesn't matter, found by recruits, college coaches, whatever, you need to download the Dynasty U app right now. It's on the Google Play Store. Anywhere you get your apps, there won't be any arguing in the house after you do this because it's going to be concise. It's going to be easy. You don't have to blow the coaches up, which they can't stand, I promise you. And it has everything there. GPA, everything in one location. It is the LinkedIn for high school recruits. That's the best way to put it. It puts them in the best position, and it's easier for college coaches, I promise. That's the Dynasty U app. Go download it today from the Google Play Store or anywhere you get your apps. We're here with Athlon Sports, Bryan Fischer, talking NIL, also host of the Going for Two podcast. Go check that out. And listen, Brian, we don't really get political on the show, but this is something that involves sports. It's going through Congress right now, something you've been covering. I want to talk about dates and deadlines. Can you, for our audience that may not be familiar with kind of the sausage making of this, what are some important dates for them to keep in mind to kind of keep their eye on as things move forward?
Well, July 1 is the one that I think everybody has to kind of keep in mind. That's essentially the date where the vast majority of the states that have NIL laws on the books are going to start. That's when you're starting to see the switch be flipped and some of these deals come out. I can certainly see on July 1st these athletes out there starting to have endorsement deals that afternoon and that evening. And so I think that is the one date to keep in mind. In terms of the NCAA, the D1 Council essentially is likely going to approve what amounts to the NCAA's version of these NIL laws. Now, it's going to differ from some of the states out there in terms of being more restrictive and less restrictive, but that's going to happen on the 22nd or the 23rd. That's when they meet. Essentially, that is going to be kind of the ability for everybody else who in states who either don't start on July 1st or who don't even have an NIL law on the book. That essentially gives them the leeway to start kind of doing these deals as well. So July 1st is really the date that everybody has to keep in mind, but it's possible that gets moved back. Mark Emmert was in front of Congress at a congressional hearing for the Senate, on Wednesday, and so he essentially said that no decision has been made about the NCAA suing some of these states to maybe get an injunction to stop that July 1st date. But I think everybody kind of is coming to the realization, even if that happens, July 1st, there's going to be some deals out there, and I don't think you can put that back into the can. Once deals are starting to get struck. So that is really the key date for everybody to keep in mind.
It's hard to close Pandora's box once you open it. I'm going to get to the NCAA in a second because I have some strong words for them. You may agree, you may disagree. I got a feeling how you're going to feel on it though, Brian. But my question is, and Mark Few, head basketball coach at Gonzaga, was asked this. If some states pass it and some states don't, and if some states pass it on July 1st and then others wait 3 or 4 months down the road, is that not a huge recruiting advantage to somebody that can offer a kid endorsements as opposed to a state that he can't? If I'm these coaches and I'm in a state that doesn't offer it or is going to be slow playing it and offering it, I mean, my hands are tied. Is that something they've been discussing? Because again, at least in college, you want everything to try and be even. Life isn't fair. We know that. But when it comes to this, is there not a recruiting advantage for the people that do and the people that don't?
There is, and that's one of the reasons I think the NCAA has pushed so hard to get some sort of national legislation. They've been in front of Congress. They've been pushing this, to various senators and representatives, and you're starting to hear some of those proposals come out. I don't think a deal, though, is going to get done at the national level in time. We only got 3 weeks now. I mean, you do have a summer recess in Congress coming around the corner, so I just have a hard time seeing some sort of national NIL framework happening. At the same time, the NCAA is going to pass, something, I believe, at the end of the month in order to have that July 1st start date. So even if the state necessarily doesn't have an NIL law, say it's a state like Utah, which is really kind of behind the curve on that, the NCAA stepping up with that legislation would allow those Utah athletes or the BYU athletes to be able to go out into that marketplace and get a deal struck. So I think at the end of the day, it's not going to matter a whole lot, but essentially the NCAA will step in and kind of fill that gap. So there isn't that much of a competitive inequity. But frankly, the last couple of weeks, we've seen it. I think you've seen some of the recruits out there in certain states really pushing because they don't want to be left behind. And so that was kind of the reason why you see some of these states kind of move so quickly these last couple of months. But I don't think it's going to be that much of a competitive inequity on the recruiting trail because essentially everybody will be able to have access to that marketplace come July 1st.
Yeah, and that's a good explanation. It's a good way to encapsulate it. Let me ask you a question, and forgive my elementariness, but what does the NCAA do other than just be the middleman in anything that involves college sports?
Well, I mean, that is all that they are doing. And you would, it's always difficult because everybody wants a stronger kind of NCAA to levy punishments. But when it comes, at their way, they're like, well, maybe we shouldn't have the strong organization based in Indianapolis. But, I think a lot of it comes down to essentially, lack of leadership at the top of the NCAA. Mark Emmert, everybody is upset with him. I know the college presidents might be the lone holdout in terms of, his job performance, but whether you talk with conference commissioners, whether you talk with certainly athletic directors, coaches, especially over the last 18 months or so, they've said that this is really the lack of leadership coming out of Indianapolis, the lack of strong statements, the lack of really unifying these parts of the country that want to do different things has been a real problem. And so I think maybe structurally the NCAA will make some adjustments going forward, but they're really caught up in terms of some of the details right now, and it's easy to take pot shots at them, but I don't see any changes to quote unquote the system anytime soon.
And that's actually a perfect segue, because my next question is just from the outside looking in, to somebody that played on the NCAA and coached in the NCAA and kind of know how they operate. Two totally different worlds when you're playing and then you're coaching. You kind of learn the other side of it, the dark side per se. I'm looking at the Power Five. I'm looking at these TV contracts. I'm looking at the power that these conferences have. I mean, $7 billion from Disney for the SEC over the long haul. If the Power Five or some of these conferences talk about the SEC eventually doesn't really like what the NCAA is doing or is getting pushback, do you see a world, Bryan, in where they break away from the NCAA? Because at the end of the day, they have the players, they have the money, they have the facilities, they have the coaches.
Yeah, I know that concept has been brought up, often, and I think it was even brought up again this past summer or past spring when you heard the European Super League and all the conversations. Well, maybe it could happen here, with a breakaway, and I still doubt it because if the Power Five were to break away, they would still need essentially an NCAA organization to kind of operate and run the rules and kind of be that connective tissue. And I don't see any changes in the short term. Frankly, they call it the Autonomy Five, can pass legislation and do things how they want right now. And so there's really not an impetus for them to make some massive changes. Now, what I think could end up happening over the short term is those Power Five leagues, and maybe after we kind of see playoff expansion and some of the other things get taken off their plates, maybe they do turn towards Indianapolis and start to demand more changes in terms of the leadership. Mark Emmert, some of the senior staff they're in Indianapolis. I think that ultimately is going to be maybe more of a way how for the Power Five and some of these major universities to kind of assert themselves more on the NCAA front rather than breaking away.
Yeah, and we're here with Bryan Fischer from Athlon Sports, talking NIL, a bunch of stuff changing, the landscape's changing, and there's so many caveats to this, Bryan. There really is, and if you can look at it from so many different angles. One that I see is, if I'm a recruit, and I'm being recruited obviously by multiple schools, and I have offers, and let's say I sign, I'm just using it as an example, sign with LSU, and they're a Powerade school, and Gatorade approaches me to do a sponsorship. Will the school have to build something into the national letter of intent saying these are our endorsers, basically a do's and don'ts? Because it's just going to be a weird look if they're a Powerade school and you look on the sideline and the quarterback's drinking Gatorade who's in the Heisman race at LSU. I find that interesting. Is there going to be some, and again, maybe I'm asking you a question you can't answer yet, but do you see that problem as a conflict of interest, or is it something to say, hey, listen, if Gatorade wants to come sponsor the guy, we got to let him?
Yeah, I think there's been some confusion over that particular issue. I mean, some of the state NIL laws do kind of have those carve-outs to where you can't have that conflict. And so I think it's an area ripe for a couple lawsuits, and I think that's why the NCAA, as part of the NIL push in Congress, kind of wants not only the antitrust exemption, but they really want protection from some of these legal challenges that are bound to come out of this. And I think that's certainly one area, where there could be some thorny issues. I think ultimately the students and the schools, they'll come to some sort of understanding. There will be kind of a stasis in the marketplace to where, frankly, Gatorade's not going to be out there, pushing if it's a Powerade school. I think they're going to want to protect their own marketing dollars being sent to the schools and part of their existing deals. I could certainly see some clauses out there in some of these agreements to where maybe there's a reduction if a certain athlete or a high profile athlete goes out and makes their own deal with a competing company. But some of that stuff is ultimately just going to have to be decided by the marketplace. And I think that's where there's some hesitancy in terms of what's ultimately going to happen. A lot of people don't know on issues like that, especially if the states themselves don't have those specific carve-outs in their NIL laws.
Yeah, and Bryan, I have a couple more questions for you, and I'm going to let you go. Another thing I talked about in my monologue is, some people have said, and I've heard this, well, if you get an endorsement, then they should hold the money until you graduate college. We can't do that. You can't tell people what to do with their money. Has there been any discussion about that in these hearings, or have they talked about saying, well, we're going to hold your money? I just don't see a world in where that's okay, regardless of what age you make. I mean, if a 14-year-old invents a toaster that you can use on the moon, he's going to get paid for that. You can't tell him where to put the money.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very Pollyannish idea to where, folks think it sounds good in theory, but in practice, I don't see any way it's really going to work out. I think ultimately, maybe more complicated than that is just the tax implications from a lot of these student athletes, getting money as part of these deals. And so I think there's a lot to be worked out on that aspect of things where it makes it complicated. I mean, the talk of all this money going into escrow and you get it after you graduate. I mean, some of these athletes they simply don't graduate and they don't have any interest in doing that as well. So what happens to the money for them? And so I think there are some thorny issues certainly with that, but I think ultimately that is going to be pushed aside for practicality standpoint. I think the money is going to come in and the money is going to go out, and a large reason for that is simply Uncle Sam.
Yeah. And my last question, Bryan, before we let you go, great stuff, man. We appreciate your time. You're really educating the audience. It's something that affects all of us. Everybody that loves college sports, not just college football, it affects all of us. And we need to know. You've been covering these hearings, and I just have a very simple question for you. Have they been productive so far to this point, or are they just treading water and Mark Emmert just kind of deflecting, a.k.a. Dikembe Mutombo?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of treading water. I think the NCAA has really, they just have not gotten out in front of the issue, and it's been really a decade where they could have done something. Certainly, coming out of the O'Banion hearing years ago, they could have been proactive on this case. They could have had their own laws, their own lobbying efforts for a national law years ago. That they could have certainly preempted some of these state laws, and they frankly haven't. They have not pushed the envelope, internally internally, and that's resulted in these external pressures. And so I think it's been difficult for some folks to kind of sit back and say, what are we doing? And I think that is one of the reasons why it's all kind of coming to a head. And frankly, the NCAA, they've got a lot of work to do. I mean, there's just so many unknowns. We're just a couple weeks away from that July 1st deadline, and there's no third-party administrator. The NCAA is kind of pushed that off in terms of the decision. They've certainly pushed off the bylaw vote itself from January to now, and so they're pushing up against the deadline. And people still don't know, even if those things had been in place in January, there are still some unknowns in terms of how it works with compliance and how it works with certainly the agents involved with this and the marketing deals that some of these schools have struck. There's still a great unknown. I think even when that switch gets flipped on July 1st, and so that is leading to a lot of angst. I think around college athletic departments, around the NCAA office itself, and beyond. And so I think that more than anything is why the NCAA is on its heels and really does have to kind of get going here, because the calendar is stopping for no one right now.
Yeah, they're going to have to make their mind up and do something, because like you said, it's not slowing down, and it's going to happen. I mean, it's literally going to happen. Not a lot of guarantees in life. But Bryan, great stuff, man. Would love to get you back on as this keeps unfolding. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media. I know a lot of people want to keep up with this, where they can find your podcast and all the content you put out as well.
Yeah, Going for Two podcast, wherever you get your podcast daily, but also on Twitter, Bryan D. Fischer, BryanDFischer. That's where all the work goes. That's where everything happens. So that's the best place to find me.
Definitely, man. Well, I appreciate it, buddy. Let's do this again.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Definitely. We appreciate you guys as well. Make sure you head to the jboyshow.com, grab some merchandise, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. It's been another edition of the Jboy Show, talking NIL, and like the old NCAA rules, we're gone.
The Jboy Show is produced by David Cohn, Technical Director Dave Hammock, Creative Director David Culbertson, Audio Engineer Feyzan Shareef, Production Assistants Blaine Crain and Kyle Orr, Executive Producers Jake Crain, Vince Thompson, Steve Chamberlain, and David Cohn. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, thejboyshow.com, for updates regarding our newest apparel and merch designs. Win the water cooler with the Jboy Show.